Good
Good
afternoon.
Oh, go
I
ahead.
apologize. Good afternoon and welcome. Today we are here from Race Today. My name is Sharella Zicki. I am one of the co-producers here, and we're actually getting ready to have a great conversation with Bernice Mireku-North. I am going to go ahead and hand this off to Lisa so she can finish introduction.
Yes. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. Today, we're going to be speaking to a candidate for State Attorneys General for Montgomery County, Maryland, which is where I live. So it's about local politics, but it's very important. And I'm very happy to have our guest, Bernice Mireku-North, today. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me on.
And let's go ahead and start our conversation now with CR and Bernice about this upcoming election.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. And let's jump right in. May I call you Bernice or?
Bernice, Miss Mireku-North, and Miss Mireku-North in the courtroom, but you know, we're among friends, so feel free to call me Bernice.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. In your career, we talk about this, we think about a person's background, and I'd like to know how you came about the legal career. How was there something in your childhood? What made you take this road?
Well, great question. So I grew up in Montgomery County, but I grew up in an area called Summit Hills, which is a pretty well-known high rise in Montgomery County, Maryland. And, growing up, we've had our share of, gun violence and drug trafficking here and there. And I remember being young and my mom wouldn't let me go out. And part of me always felt like something was wrong with that. Why can't we all feel safe? And I think that seed started very early on in my career, where I've always sought the opportunity to keep people safe, regardless of who they are. I have a younger brother, he's 5 years younger than me. So I always was the protective sister and daughter in my community. And so what led me to start a legal career was my first job in college was working for the U.S. Attorney's Office in Greenbelt. I was thinking about becoming a lawyer, wasn't really sure because I did not come from a family of lawyers. I just thought, looking at TV, that seems like that's the avenue to get justice and keep people safe. So I applied to the job at U.S. Attorney's Office as a college aide, and that opened the door for me to understand at a younger age how that part of the justice system works. So that propelled me to want to move on to law school right away after finishing college, which is what I did. I went on to, after graduating from the University of Maryland, I went on to Howard University School of Law. And I chose Howard because I wanted a social justice lens to whatever I decided to do in my legal career, especially criminal justice. So I interned for a couple prosecutors' offices during law school. And then I went on to work for a judge in DC Superior Court and another judge in Prince George's County Circuit Court. And both of them had different backgrounds. One was a career public defender, and the other one was a career prosecutor, because I wanted that comprehensive training as what justice system looks like, what the criminal justice system looks like from both ends. And I chose prosecution after clerking because I knew they had a great deal of power, a great deal of authority. They decide what charges to file. They decide what plea offers to give to the accused, to start negotiations, if that. They decide whether to take a case to trial. They decide what a sentence recommendation should be. And oftentimes judges go along with their prosecutor sentences the person to, give or take a couple exceptions. But it had a great deal of authority. And I felt that it was important to have someone with my diverse background, with my varied learned experiences, making those decisions so I can have a more compassionate yet protective view of justice. I wanted to keep people accountable, but I didn't want people feeling railroaded by the system to the extent that I could be able to as a line prosecutor.
Well, thank you. Let me, before I ask another question, For those who may be wondering about the name on my screen, my wife's been using my computer again. I see that. But for those of you who may be wondering, I am C.R. Gibbs, author, lecturer, and historian who has the tremendous honor of being the moderator of the Race Today podcast. I thought I had that fixed, but once we got past rotary phones, I've not been able to keep up with the technology. So we're going to go ahead and just don't pay attention to that to that title. You Well, it's been said that Montgomery County is sort of as a quote unquote wealthy, and I say that because we have extremes of wealth and poverty. We have places that are absolutely pacific in nature, but we also have great violence. Uh, why do you want to do this now, given the nature of the country? And we know that that is infectious in terms of the hard times that are going on. Why now?
Right. Well, I am currently a criminal defense attorney, and I always felt while being a criminal defense attorney, I can effectuate justice on that lens, holding prosecutors accountable, making sure things are done fairly. But the crisis that we're in right now, not just Montgomery County, but nationally in terms of the rise in violence, it's coming from really a cultural fight between the haves and have-nots. It's really coming down to the need in Montgomery County for a paradigm shift on how we're viewing justice. Because currently the status quo has had the same view of justice for at least 16 years. The incumbent has been working there since 1982. He's been a state's attorney since 2006. He sees certain ways of administering justice that does not match the needs of today. I would argue that the number of crimes that are going up, the violence between other people are in despair, people are hurting. And we need a state's attorney that's compassionate about that, still holding people accountable, but how are we working with our community partners to keep everybody safe beyond just, let's just prosecute the case and let's make sure we get a conviction. We need to work together, and that's just simply not happening. And that's why I'm starting now to take the leap and run for state's attorney. I've been a community leader for almost a decade, particularly when it came to anything regarding criminal justice reform, to the extent that I had the tools to do so. Most recently, I served as co-chair of our Reimagining Public Safety Task Force, where we did about 87 recommendations for the county executive to consider on reforming the way we're doing public safety. But what led me to run now was, you can join all the groups in the world, but if you don't have the leadership pushing us forward, we're going to remain stagnant. And that's when I said enough. I have a 5-year-old who's about to enter a public school system next year, and I'm seeing the rise in crime happening in the school system. So I am very committed to keeping us safe, but I also see disproportionate treatment of our young Black men in Montgomery County, how the juvenile system in this county is predominantly Black and Latino, when they don't make up the predominant portion of this county. And that's a problem that's not being addressed, and it can be addressed in Montgomery County. You talked earlier about being an affluent county. It's about changing the way we're using our resources, changing the way that we have relationships with community stakeholders to effectuate change with people that understand what the pain they're going through my lived experiences. And that's what makes me unique to start right now, because I hate to see us in further pain. I hate to see us crying out for justice on the streets in Montgomery County, of all places. We need to stand up and take leadership changes. And that's why I decided to do it now.
Okay. The Maryland Record says that the election race you're in will focus less on who will be toughest on crime and more on who has the best plan for treating nonviolent criminals. And as lofty as those ideals sound, how realistic is that in terms of appealing? You still have to appeal to a lot of voters. And how do you plan to do that? How can you bridge those two objectives that some would say are diametrically opposed to one another?
Yes, and that comes through changing the narrative on the issue. For instance, I tell people about a case that I had where this young kid got charged with distribution of marijuana, in a climate where we're talking about decriminalizing it. It was for $5. And he was facing a felony. He was facing a risk to his academic career over $5. And oftentimes when I tell people that don't normally have those circumstances in their life, they realize the absurdity in that. They realize the unjust nature of that. And I think we have a Montgomery County that recognizes what it means to be fair and just, even though they might not have those similar problems in their own backyard. And that's how I'm able to reach out to those that might not see the need for change as much. When they see some things just don't sound right and it's happening in our office, they'll take a second look. And that's why it's important to step up and run and not wait for an open seat. The number of people that have reached out to me during this campaign explaining various injustices in that office in terms of the zealous prosecution and not looking at the whole person. This race allows people the opportunity to make their voices heard on that they didn't feel it before. And I think that helps with safety, because as long as you have someone that's willing to have an open ear to it, that's willing to say, how do we fix that to make everyone feel that they're getting proper treatment in the system, that restoration of trust is critical to public safety. And that's what makes my approach unique to the other challengers. I'm always coming with the fact that, are we going to restore trust in the system by doing this particular act? And that's the way it should be.
Thank you. What is the Back on Track diversion program? Have you heard of that? Is it?
I've heard it. I've heard of that, and I know that's a Prince George's County program, particularly. And I would be remiss if I say that I haven't read up on the details of that as of today, but I know vaguely it's about first-time offenders, for those who are charged with drug distribution cases, and they might have that opportunity to go to hit some couple college courses, from my understanding, in order to get back on track, really. Records expunged, I believe the records are expunged, but there is a particular point in the process where the record is dealt with in a way it's amenable to the kids in the program. But that is a program that I believe is relatively new in Prince George's County. But the one thing I've heard about that program is that sometimes kids that might not go to the class. So are we really holding the young people accountable? We can't just say we're doing the program. What tools are in place to hold those young people accountable? Because I think if you don't have that accountability tools in place, then the reform conversation makes it difficult for people to buy in, right? People want to feel safe by not having reoffenders. So let's create tools to get them back on track, but hold them accountable to doing so.
Well, and so really, as you can see, I'm setting you up to ask if you can see something like that working in Montgomery County, and would people expect the leadership for that to come out of your office or another part of the county government?
I think it's a program that, I mean, the way the program is in Prince George's County is definitely something that I think might not work in Montgomery County, in that it's not just the educational component, is that let's talk to the small businesses. I think that's a missing component that's very unique to Montgomery County. There's so many thriving small businesses here. A lot of them, of course, have suffered during the pandemic. Oftentimes with distribution cases, at least the ones that I've had, it's always a situation where the person is just looking for extra money. That's the bottom line, just looking for a job. And this is a quick opportunity. Oftentimes, these are the kind of contacts that I have. And having the relationships with the small business owners, as well as folks in labor, creating opportunities for people to literally get back on track, having not just education component to it, but a real workforce component to it is critical. So there's a way to tool it so it's more amenable to Montgomery County, but it's going to take knowledge of the leaders in Montgomery County and the relationships in Montgomery County to make it happen in an efficient way. It is something that can be done in the U.S. In the State's Attorney's Office, but an even better model is to have it more of a ecosystem of all different stakeholders involved, similar to something like a collaboration council where you have all these different government agencies, pull their funds together to create programs. That can be done in instances like, restoring individuals who have been convicted of these drug offenses first time. Let's have a coalition of different stakeholders, call it an initiative, a collaboration of some sort. Let's start those conversations and pull our money together. That's another way to look at it. So it's not just, the State's Attorney's Office having all the burden. It can happen, but in terms of being quick about it, more efficient about it, let's talk with other stakeholders as well, see what money we can pull in to get a better program that's better suited for Montgomery County.
Thank you. I don't want to be too greedy. If any of my other colleagues want to get in and ask a question, I'll be quiet for a minute. And so anyone?
Maybe
Right.
if you can comment anything that you might have seen from your adversaries that have been challenging you for the race, if you have something you wanted to say at this moment now.
In terms of the race or the system?
Either one is
Okay.
fine, race or system.
Okay, so challenges. I would say that people might not understand that me running this race is not, it's not an amateur act. I've accomplished quite a bit in my 40 years of living. I went to law school in my 20s. I went straight to law school. In my 30s, I was recognized by the Daily Record for my professional achievements and commitment to change. I also led 2 diverse community groups in Montgomery County in my 30s with people from all walks of life. So I'm very familiar with the not just the leaders in Montgomery County, the political leaders, but the community stakeholders and the diversity of them. I cherish that. And I take it seriously to implement that, that lens of diversity in the State's Attorney's Office quickly. And that's why, it's another reason why I don't want to wait for an open seat. I think we need to be swift in making sure that we have an office that reflects the county. So I've accomplished quite a bit in my career, and I know how to manage an office. It doesn't matter if it's $21 million or $20. I'm a law firm owner. So I have a small law firm, but again, it's about having a plan, make sure you have the right teams to implement the plan, having the benchmarks in place, making sure we're all held accountable for achieving those benchmarks. That's pretty much basic 101 in terms of running anything. So it can be a group of 10 people or 100 people. It's really coming down to good communications and good planning and the right vision for everyone to buy into. And I take that very seriously for us to have an office that works well together, and we work well together, we thrive. And if we thrive, the county thrives.
Okay. Now, I've read that you're a solo practitioner. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. How will you balance 2 jobs if you win the election?
You don't. You have to quit your job. I mean, you can't take on a second legal job if you are working for the State's Attorney's Office. That it used to be the rule where you were able to many years ago, but I was not of that generation. But I did have colleagues when I was a assistant state's attorney in Anne Arundel County. I had a couple colleagues that were grandfathered in and they had 2 practices, but no, I would have to quit my practice. I remember hearing about that. I was like, wow, that's pretty amazing. But I can't see how that's even possible, even if it was permitted. It really is a full-time job. It's not just about, again, pushing these cases forward for prosecution. It's about collectively working with stakeholders to see how we can make the community safer. I'm tired of seeing certain pockets of this county constantly getting hit with violence when we're in a county that's affluent, that's progressive. I think we all need to be on the same page with that. And it takes someone with a variety of learned experiences like my own to understand that and get everybody on board with that.
Thank you.
Sure.
I'm I'm sorry, did I hear someone? Okay, if we understand that, this is what you're going to do, I won't say yes. Well, yes, I will. Montgomery County has a reputation, certainly parts of it, in the upper echelon of being very hidebound, of operating within a well-defined, some would say rut, some would say good old boys club, as far as getting things done. If we look, for example, at some might call it difficulty in terms of new people breaking into the judgeship in Montgomery County. And you have people who've been knocking on the door for years and they cannot bring that circle. And it seems as though anytime anyone new who might, heaven forbid, bring in new ideas, runs into that. How in the earth are you going to leap over that tradition? Let me give it a nice term. In Montgomery County, how do you deal with that?
Well, it's going to take bringing in more diverse voices into the fold. What I found during this campaign is that a lot of people that cannot connect to the status quo, cannot connect to the Good Boys Network, relate to my campaign because it has become this, outside the traditional establishment campaign that people gravitate to because they want to see themselves in government. They just don't know how. They know how government can affect their lives, affect their freedom, but they weren't sure who's pulling the strings and who's in charge. So in terms of actually working with the networks that may in fact still exist, when I'm elected. I have a strong will to get things done. I am very committed to making sure that we're treating everyone fairly, and I will use all the tools necessary to achieve that. If we have to, bring more people into the fold to join these people in the network to really stir up some change, that's one thing. And that's going to take some time. I know that I'll be foolish to think that, once I get in, everything's going to be gravy. That's just not reality. When I was a prosecutor in Anne Arundel County, I knew that wasn't the reality. We had a change in leadership, not just a change in leadership, but a change of guard, really, I remember witnessing the changes in everybody, how people felt, how, their work ethic changed, their morale changed, all that. And so because I've been through that personally, unlike the other challengers, I know how sensitive that transitional period is and how you really have to do everything you can to build strong relationships with those people in the network and meet them in the middle in terms of moving forward, because at the end of the day, we're all just trying to do the good work in the criminal justice system, and we have to keep that in mind when we're moving forward with litigating and being in courtroom in criminal justice.
Would you explain now, is there a primary that you have to have first and then the general, and when do these occur?
Right. So the primary election is July 19th. Because Montgomery County is mostly Democratic, it's a Democratic stronghold in the state of Maryland, the primary election is pretty much the race. You don't get a second shot in the general election. So oftentimes people say, oh, I want to vote for you, but I have to remind them, please vote in the primary. Don't wait until November. Don't wait, because that's the important race. And the early voting is July 7th through the 14th. The last day to register to vote is June 28th. And then of course, the general election is in November, and the early voting is late October. So we have some time, but the big focus is the primary. There's gonna be a lot of people on the ballot, a lot of names to choose from, but this is a race that is critically important. It makes a difference as to how people, have their freedom. It makes a difference as to people's economic status, school status, things like that, because the criminal justice system can help or hurt communities. And so this type of role as state's attorney is so powerful. It's important to know, who's going to be the person leading these decisions for the office.
The state government, what would be your relationship or would you maintain the way it is now with the state government?
So when you say state government, I am thinking of the state delegation, a number of which have endorsed my race throughout the county. Delegate Julie Polokovich Carr and represents Rockville and Gaithersburg, Leslie Lopez and Gabriel Acevero. Those delegates represent District 39, which is Germantown, Montgomery Village, facing a unusual amount of rise in crime in that area. And I'm also supported by Delegate Janelle Wilkins, who represents Silver Spring, Tacoma Park, and including downtown Silver Spring. And these are areas that have had their share of criminal activity that people are concerned about. Anything from the loud car racing at night, creating disturbances in the middle of the night, to murders in basketball courts. I mean, it's a variety of needs that need to be addressed. Pedestrian safety is another big one, another big issue that has not been talked about enough really during this campaign. So working with them to not only help them identify, issues that we can be forward thinking on in criminal justice reform, but also just being available, really being available, which is why a lot of them endorsed me so early in the race when I reached out to them. They were dealing with the status quo that was not connecting with them. And that was the frustration that people couldn't wait on trying to figure out, because we're dealing with post-George Floyd. There's an urgency of change right now, and having a prosecutor that understands that urgency, like myself, is critical to have good partnerships to actually get things done.
Okay. When I say state government, I also mean Annapolis.
Right.
And so what happens in terms, or what do you need from the state to help you in your job should you be elected? And what would you call on that perhaps no one has ever called on the state to provide before?
Good question. I would say oftentimes when the state's attorney is really seeking the help of the state legislation and state legislator and those at the governor's mansion, is really to implement programs and get funding to create the programs, and also create laws that make it easier for prosecutors to prosecute their cases and to actually administer justice. I know one of the recent initiatives by state's attorney was the expansion of the hate crime law to change the way we're proving hate crimes. That's something that it took a state's attorney to start the fight on to actually make things happen. And unfortunately, it was not us when we were also dealing with, when I say us, it was not our own current state's attorney that was leading that fight when we did have our share of hate crimes. But that's one of the tools that a prosecutor can use, actually going to Annapolis and fighting for legislation to make it easier to prosecute. Another, and not just to prosecute, but to restore communities. Another initiative I recall in Baltimore City was the implementation of having a hearing to vacate judgments. You now have to get a hearing for the court to vacate someone's judgment for good cause. That was led by a prosecutor. In fact, the law is very skewed towards a prosecutor because it's up to the prosecutor to file the motion. No one else can do it. But that's an example of how powerful a prosecutor can be to work with the states on changing laws to make their jobs easier. And in terms of programs, like I've considered implementing a juvenile mental health court. So if it takes state legislation or maybe a task force to get the appropriate data needed to justify the work that we have to do to develop the mental health court, that's another way of looking at them as a partner in true reform and restoration of our youth. There's so many different ways to go about it. And the one thing about this race is that I am, I kind of came of age with a lot of these folks that are in Annapolis politically. So I know them all pretty well. And even if I don't, I'm definitely not afraid to build that rapport and build those relationships that are necessary to effectuate change, because that's critical. That's critical to get things done in Annapolis, is just good relationships and good communication.
It is important to reach out. You have, given the press of the times and the difficulties in the county, it seems as part of you doing something in a new way. You're going to have to forge relationships that maybe weren't there 5 or 10 years ago. It will be interesting to see. Would you care to describe the weaknesses of your opponents, or you want to leave that alone?
I'll leave that alone. I mean, it's in the sense that, each of us have different visions of justice. It's just that simple. And so I wouldn't call necessarily weaknesses on them, but in terms of why you should vote for me over the other people, words alone don't effectuate justice. All of us as lawyers, we are licensed to practice law. We have gone to law school. We can do our research. We can articulate our arguments to prove our case. But what motivates us to change comes from our lived experiences. And you're not going to hear a lot of that from the other challengers or even the incumbents, because they don't have it. They don't have it. I can talk about, I've had family members that have dealt with mental health issues, drug addiction, feeling out of sorts, theft prior, things like that. I've had these issues, not just in my family, but in the communities that I've lived in, and how people are trying to get by in spite of them. These are experiences that are always at the forefront of my mind when I'm making any decisions, either for my clients or when I'm deciding, what policies to put forth and present to the public as to why, as to what I will do once I'm in the office of the state's attorney. And that's simply unmatched. You can't research you can't research and actually regurgitate what I've been through and why it matters to me and my passion. But you can regurgitate all the talking points that are out there: help the youth, restorative justice. Those are buzzwords that have been out there, and the other opponents will say that. But what's the drive for them to really change things? What's the drive? And that's something that I find is not strong enough for me to stay out of this race. I think it's too important to our youth. It's too important to our communities to not have someone in the office that cares about the disadvantaged, as well as those that are affluent and still want their property protected.
Well, you'll be happy to know that my last question is on when you talk about change. You've also mentioned transparency, and so what does bringing transparency to your job? What does that mean to you? What does it look like?
Right. So transparency would include one, having a data analyst. So when we're talking about what types of cases to charge, making sure that we have data present to determine what cases are being charged and why. And not only that, the plea offers that are being offered and why. Those are things that if we can have the data to show if there's any disproportionate treatment of certain individuals or certain communities, then that can be on the forefront of people's minds if they're interested. I know the data is out there, and it's about having a prosecutor that's willing to put that out there. I know in Baltimore City, they've done that multiple times to tell the data of what's being prosecuted and the conviction rates and whatnot. It's critical to be transparent because there is such a distrust in the system. I hear oftentimes in the news about why are all these kids hurting each other or not telling the police what's going on. Oftentimes they think something bad's going to happen if they talk to police, and that's unfortunate, but that's the system that we're in. So it's not just transparency in the data, but it's transparency in the person. It's transparency of the person, being very real and being very honest with the kind of people that are being very real from the people that are prosecuting these cases, and letting people know who are the individuals that are making these decisions. That's also going to include making sure that we have line prosecutors, not just beyond the community, but tell their stories, and hiring prosecutors with varied backgrounds, not just in education, but in life experiences. So they can go out and relate to these folks that feel like they're not being heard in that office.
Wonderful. To my colleagues, I give you a final chance to ask any more questions. If not, I will turn it over to Lisa, and she'll take it from there. Any other questions?
I actually do have a question for you, Bernice. This is just more so on just ending on a high note. You mentioned your 5-year-old daughter, and you talked about your lived-in experience. And you also mentioned that what motivates you with Ketanji Brown being the new judge. How does that motivate you from the glass ceiling point of view of people of color just trying to progress, and what motivates you to continue on this work? I know we touched on a little aspect, but what's your true motivation to keep going and not let the negativity affect you?
Oh, great question. Well, the swearing in of Supreme Court Justice Jackson was definitely historical, emotional, and you can look at her, and as a Black woman who is also trying to vie to be the first Black woman in this office. I studied her. I studied her during this hearing. It's like, how do you handle this immense pressure when you're so close to victory? And a lot of it's just very much utilizing your inner strength. I know she took a lot of deep breaths. I mean, really remembering, what brought her here, and what, that still small voice that led her to even think about this opportunity. It's the same small voice I have in my head as I thought about this opportunity to run. As I said earlier, I don't come from a family of lawyers. This is not a legacy. I don't feel entitled to it. I felt called to it. So what motivates me is the calling on my life to do this work. And however it is done, it's going to be done in a way that's going to be in line with my calling right now is to run for this seat. And being the fact that I am a mom, and that I guess technically I'm a millennial, which I'm on the older side. I have a unique experience in this because I've seen my younger generation suffer through school violence for almost 20 years. When I myself as a student never had that experience. It was only after I left high school where we had the effects of Columbine and subsequent school shootings. And it just motivates me to say there's got to be a different way, because all of us in our class 99, Blair High School, go Blazers, we lived a life where we didn't have police in schools, and we still learn how to treat each other well and feel safe. There's a way back to that. I'm passionate about that. And a lot of young people are too, but we've had these political footballs with different tools of safety that the young people are not being heard on. But they're looking for a leader on that, looking for a leader. And that's why that's what motivates me, because I know they're looking for a leader. Every person I talk to about this race, they're not dissuaded by my message. They're in fact encouraged. It's really just about how many people know about it. Because once the last thing I want to hear is someone saying, oh, I didn't know, because they felt like if they did know, they would have changed the way they look at things in this county. Like, I didn't know there's an option to have some. I hear it all the time. I'm not kidding. And that's what motivates me to keep telling people, because people are excited about the kind of leader I'm going to be, the kind of manager I'm going to be for that office, and the vision, leadership, and experience that I can bring. And that excitement, when I see that energy, when I see people say, I'm going to vote for the first time ever, even though I'm registered to vote for almost 10, 15 years because of you. That's what keeps me going, because I know there's more people out there feeling that same way. So I always invite people to say, hey, look at my website, www.mireku-north.com. Go to my Facebook page. Instagram is a big favorite among the people that support me. So Instagram, but yeah, that's how I keep going. It's just those experiences, people get excited and inspired by the campaign.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. For our listeners, again, you've been listening to Bernice Mireku-North. Lisa, take it away.
Thank you so much for this wonderful conversation, and talking to our listeners about your platform. And for everybody, please remember July 19th, right?
Yes,
Is the
that's
date.
the day of the primary. You can vote early, July 7th through 14th. You can also vote by mail.
Okay, that's very good to know. Thank you so much, Bernice. Have a great day, everybody.
Have a great one. Bye-bye, everyone. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.